just to chime in on that last little comment right there. I mean, I a good way to look at it, I think, is that, and you kind of mentioned, a little bit ago, talking about Alabama recruiting their guys back, their juniors that could leave to the NFL. We're getting them to come back. I mean, I think it's very obvious that, playing with Kyren Williams helps Logan Diggs. I mean, you can start to, just Logan Diggs had a play earlier where, he was hit 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage on a 3rd and 1 or something like that in the first half, and breaks it for 6, 7, 8 yards, picks up the first down. I mean, you can see to a certain degree the kind of effect that playing with and watching Kyren Williams has had on Logan Diggs. He liked Kyren Williams on that particular play. Now, I mean, I don't know. So I guess what I'm saying in a roundabout way is that, Kyren Williams, if he comes back, Logan Diggs comes back that much better because he's got that guy to compete with, that guy to continue to learn from, and that type of stuff. And so I really like that point that you made about, what Alabama does. I mean, and so it kind of goes back to what we were saying, if Notre Dame can convince, hey, Kyren, guess what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to go put together, and you tweeted this to me earlier today, we're going to go put together, not 33 trucking like they did for Josh Adams, but something like that, find some sort of a catchy, like that would be lame. Like, we got to find something completely different, but some sort of like catchy something or another, and put together that campaign in the way that they did. We're going to do that for you. You've got the opportunity to go elsewhere and make money from companies or whatever. Like, there's a legitimate pitch to Kyren Williams to come back. So I don't know. We've talked about this for a long time, but and like I say, if Kyren Williams comes back, that's better in my opinion for Logan Diggs's long-term career. And that's what I was kind of trying to say when I was stuttering and rambling just a little bit ago. And it's just good for Notre Dame's program altogether, the running back room, and just Notre Dame's program in terms of, having one of your best leaders back again. So yeah, I mean, regardless, like I say, Kyren Williams or not next year, I mean, Notre Dame is going to be in a good spot, but man, I really want to have him back. So I don't know. I'll stop now.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's kind of an underrated point to the whole topic there, is if he were to return, not only are you getting one of the best players in college football, just in general, but you're also getting one of your best leaders. And I don't think that can be understated. And in reality, there are a lot of guys that could return to this roster that could make it just so much better. I'm going to leave Kyle Hamilton out of this because when you're a top 5 pick in the draft, you just don't come back. He's right. Not the type of player that should ever come back. And again, that's not a knock on him. That's not hey, Notre Dame needs to recruit him better to come back. Alabama wouldn't recruit Kyle Hamilton back to Alabama. That's a Jamar Chase level talent on the opposite side of the football that's just never going to come back. But you have guys like Jarrett Patterson who could come back for his 5th year and be maybe the best center in college football and lead the offensive line. You have Isaiah Foskey who can come back, who's been definitely trending up in draft boards with, close to 10 sacks. Maybe he's there. I don't think he had a sack today, even though Notre Dame had 8 or 9, which is crazy to think about. But he's a guy that could come back and be an absolute terror, rushing the passer. Jason Adamalola is another guy. There's been a lot of rumors of him being a guy that who has a year of eligibility that could leave for the NFL, but he is certainly a guy that if you brought him back, just bolsters the defensive line significantly. Maybe some lesser guys. I mean, just again, on the offensive side of the ball, maybe being able to get Avery Davis back for a 6th year, convincing Kevin Austin that he might not be 100% ready for the NFL only after 1 year of really good college football play, getting those guys back who I think in Kevin Austin's case, it's probably to a lesser extent because I think he is coming back. But then maybe even keeping a few guys out of the portal. A guy like Tariq Bracy, who's been pretty good for them in the slot, he could easily go to another roster and be the starter on the outside. But keeping him keeping him at Notre Dame and having him as a fifth-year guy that can compete in the slot for you. I think that's important. So there are definitely some guys on this roster where if they weren't, not necessarily, like I said, the Kyle Hamilton types or even the Kyron Williams types, if you were able to keep them on this roster, it makes next year's team, I think, just on paper going in, just significantly better overall.
Yeah, and like guys like Xavier Watts and things like, you could see him being like, oh my goodness, like, I know he's starting to sort of, find his role on the defensive side, but you could eventually see him say, you know what, I want to play receiver, I want to go somewhere and play receiver, so I'm going to transfer. I mean, keeping those guys as well. I mean, I think the keeping the guys out of the portal thing is going to be big for Notre Dame, I feel like, because the byproduct of having a lot of depth, I feel like, is, some guys don't get to play as many snaps as they want to. And so if, you got guys who are unhealthy or feel like that's unhealthy for them, and it's an unhealthy thought process, like, hey, I'm not getting mine. That's what you want to avoid. And if you can get the buy-in that, like, you can be here, you can be a part of something bigger than yourself and that type of stuff, that's obviously something that's very important. So that's a really good point that you just made as well.
And I think in like a guy like Patterson's case, if he ends up leaving, you're having, 3/5 of your offensive line gone again after losing 4 out of 5 the previous year. And, granted, yes, there were some arguments, at least early on, that guys like Kane Madden and Josh Lugg maybe aren't the guys and you can replace them fairly easily. And that might still be the case. When you get Blake Fisher back next year, Rocco Spindler will be in the program for another season. And you'll have, Alt and Kristofic and, Zeke Correll can probably fill in at center, admirably. Can't talk right now, but you'd probably be fine, and you wouldn't have the issues that you had at the beginning of this season, certainly. But you bring Jarrett Patterson back. That's 3 guys that have been starting now for several games on the left side and in the middle. And then really you're only replacing 2 guys that some people think are your worst 2 starters on the offensive line. So there's arguments that it could be better. So again, it's right now it's probably neither here or there, and we'll obviously find a lot of this stuff out and it will sort itself out, and it's stuff that you can't really predict or worry about because it's going to happen. But they're certainly interesting because I think at least even going into this season, regardless of how Notre Dame has played, there were people that thought this was sort of a rebuilding year of sorts or a retooling year of sorts. And then that next year and the year after would be the years that, you're competing again for a national championship. And just so happens that Notre Dame, I think, is in a good spot right now where even on a down year, they're having success and probably going 11-1 or 10-2, whatever it is, depending on the season. And it's more of a rebuild or more of a retool than a rebuild. But then you have next year with all the other guys that, supposedly are going to bring the program back to a couple years past.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't really have, a whole lot to add. I mean, your point on the offensive line, I mean, I would even argue that if you were able to bring Jarrett Patterson back, you're really at that point almost just replacing one offensive lineman, because I think you feel like Blake Fisher is would have been fine this year had he got the opportunity to continue to play. And so, I guess a positive byproduct of that is, well, you got Joe Alt, a whole lot of opportunity at left tackle. Maybe he moves to right next year and Blake Fisher's your left tackle or whatever the situation is. And even the guys that you talked about that, not you, but that we talked about as Notre Dame fans throughout, that struggled throughout the first part of the year, Zeke Correll, but even like Michael Carmody, Tosh Baker. I mean, those guys, they got some experience this year and another year in the weight room. I mean, those guys, are good offensive. I mean, they're playing at Notre Dame. They're good offensive linemen. They were good offensive linemen in high school, dominant. At some point, once they start playing against, guys that are, on there that don't have like, the George Karloftises of the world. Okay. And when they start playing against guys that only have the same amount of experience as them, then they're going to start to look better too. So, I mean, you're going to talk about having hopefully 7 or 8 offensive linemen that you feel pretty decent about because they have some experience. They've shown certain things at certain times. They got another year in the weight room. And obviously then you only have to fill 5 spots out of those 7 or 8 offensive linemen. So, and you generally feel pretty decent about 4 or 5 of them to begin with. So, that's where I hope, this season has taken Notre Dame, is that they've had to endure some things, but that the stuff that they endured is really going to, and I keep talking about the window. Like I say, next year or the year after, I think that's the window. So, yeah, I mean, that's all I got to say about that, I guess.
Well, and then you're really building some cohesion on the offensive line if Patterson comes back, because really, like you mentioned, you have Fisher and some of the other guys. Let's just say next year's offensive line is Joe Alt and Fisher at tackle, whichever spot. Pick one. Then you have Kristofic, Patterson, and then let's just say Rocco Spindler's your starting right guard. The next season, you're only losing Patterson. Hopefully Carell is still there. I mean, that could easily be a guy that transfers out if he's not getting his time. But let's just say Carell's there. Then you're only replacing one guy. And even if he's not there, you're still only replacing one guy. It just depends who's going to be the center at that point. And then those guys could all be there even the next season. So you're looking at, possibly only replacing one guy or no guys, for 2 or 3 seasons down the line. Which could really, really bode well for Notre Dame, being offensive line recruiting the way they do. You're looking at all of those guys as, 4th year or 5th year seniors at one point in time. And maybe Tyler Buckner at that point's a senior or wherever he's at, or whoever your quarterback is at the time. Maybe it's Walker Howard, who they're after this year as another 5-star kid. Whoever it is. I mean, you're at that point where hopefully the recruiting's there that we've been talking about during this, 55 minutes of ranting about it. But if the recruiting is really there to the better than what it's been in the past and what it seems to be trending towards, especially on the offensive side of the ball, because I think the defensive side of the ball, we all understand they've recruited well and it's only getting better. But let's just say you have this offensive line unit we're talking about. You put in an elite quarterback, maybe some elite, receivers in the running game, and then you're competing for a national championship, and not just getting there, but you're actually competing, I guess is what I'm really getting at.